Hi, Greg Stewart with Maizex Seeds. Hey, it's been a great fall with Maizex. We've done plot tours and agronomy meetings and outdoor farm shows and a whole range of things where we've talked about our lineup for next year and agronomy information. So this little video just highlights some of the things we've talked about, maybe gives you a little idea on some of the products and some of the things we're talking about. So let's get started. One of the things we have been looking at is this cool idea of rolling or cutting soybeans to sort of shorten up the inner nodes and make them stand a little better. And so we did that, and then we compared that to actually Y-dropping them. That is additional UAN down between the rows on the 10th of July or some G24 down between the rows in a Y-drop fashion, and then evaluate how those beans stand when you've rolled them and cut them versus giving them extra fertility in that flowering early pod set period. So I got two varieties beside me, Columbia and Laser, and they sort of show an interesting trend. We'll talk about the Lasers first, sort of a new bean for us. It was quite intrigued that when I rolled them and cut them, they didn't look any different than when I gave them extra nutrients. That is, they stood well when I cut them and rolled them, and they also stood well when we gave them extra fertility. If I compare that to Columbia, Columbia actually looked like they shortened up the inner nodes and stood a little bit better when we scared them, that is, rolled them and cut them, versus where we loved them by putting down extra nutrients. And so this gives us a nice way of sort of evaluating the standability, whether we'd recommend beans for really fertile ground or whether maybe a bean that would go on tougher ground. Not really expecting that you'll necessarily roll them or cut them, but just gives us a nice way of evaluating our bean varieties for this year in terms of their standability, how much they can handle really fertile ground and not go over on you, versus whether they're a bean that could go on to onto tougher situations. So Laser and Columbia, two nice beans to look at when you're considering moving forward for bean ordering for 2019. Hey, there's a fair bit of interest in non-GMO corn hybrids as well, and at Maizex we have a nice lineup of conventional non-GMO hybrids in our Maizex labeling. We look at MZ305. The X at the end of it signifies that it's an untreated non-GMO product. And I'm standing between 248, which is a 2400 heat unit variety, and 305, which is 2750. We have a full lineup of non-GMO, but these are two of our stars in terms of non-GMO performance, showing up real well. So if you're trying to develop maybe a non-GMO market of your own, or you're in part of the province where there's an option for selling non-GMO corn, you'd want to have a close look at these two products. And of course, if you happen to want them as non-GMO and untreated seed, you'd need to get that order into Maizex quite early in the system. We'd love to see that order for non-GMO hybrids that you're going to want them untreated to be in by the 1st of November. Something for you to look at in terms of non-GMO opportunities maybe in your area. At Maizex, we've spent a fair bit of time trying to evaluate our hybrids for their response to increased management. Most of you have heard my story on this. Our increased management comparisons are essentially moving up 5,000 plants per acre, up 50 pounds of nitrogen, and up a fungicide application, compared to a more standard approach would be 32,000, maybe 150 pounds of nitrogen instead of 200, and no fungicide application. Then, of course, the exciting part at Maizex is to look at all of our hybrids and score them as to whether they're offensive hybrids that respond aggressively to the extra inputs, or whether they're more defensive hybrids that we give them a lower score because they don't tend to respond to the fungicide, the extra population, or the nitrogen as much. So I'm standing between 3964, which is a 2950 heat unit hybrid, and 3033, which is a 2750 heat unit hybrid. And the interesting thing about these two hybrids is they both have a nice fit in their heat unit range, but 3964 we rank quite high. We score quite high as being an offensive hybrid that responds to population, nitrogen, and fungicide. 3033, a little bit more of a workhorse. Doesn't tend to respond to the extra inputs as much. A little more of a go-anywhere hybrid. Wouldn't be a hybrid that you would necessarily put on your best ground, right? But would be a hybrid that you could expect to perform well without necessarily pampering it, without necessarily spraying it with fungicides. In our seed catalog, you'll see that most of our hybrids have some sort of an evaluation that you can use to manage them, whether we rank them as high numbers for intensive management or whether we rank them as slightly lower numbers. There's good fits for those hybrids and that information in your operation. Over the last few months at our agronomy meetings this fall, at the end of August into September, we've had a fun time talking about planting depth. Now I know what some of you are thinking, surely we figured out corn planting depth, it's 2018. And I guess I'm here to confess that maybe there's still some things to learn. So traditionally we thought if you're into moisture, 1 3/4, 2 inches deep, that's perfect. That's all there is to worry about. And we've seen some data sets coming out where they're looking at deeper planting, 2.5, 3 inches deep, and some of the impact of improving corn emergence, particularly narrowing that window of emergence. So rather than shallow planted corn, I'm talking 1.5 inches, that might emerge over 5 days. Could you take it to 2.5 or 3 inches deep? Obviously they're not going to come up on the early side, right? Because the little suckers are 3 inches deep. But instead of a 5-day window for emergence, could you narrow that to a 2-day window for emergence? And if you could do that, I think we can improve yields. In some of these boards that we do, what we're looking at here is how uniform is the ear count. And if I look at a plant like this here, I'm worried that that is a plant that is a late emerger and is going to sting us in terms of yield. Could we get rid of some of that variability, some of those late emergers, if we moved our planting depth just a little bit deeper? So we don't really know the answer for that yet, but so far the evidence seems to lead towards the idea that rather than being happy at 1 3/4, 2 inches deep, even if you are nicely into moisture, that perhaps a little bit deeper, again, takes some of the noise out of that seed bed and gives you a more uniform emergence and therefore improved yields. Certainly something for you to try in 2019, even if it's just in an isolated spot on the field where you go a little bit deeper than what you're used to.